Hey, here we are again. All right, well, let's start talking about the brain, right? And we're going to look at it in, again, kind of ascending order, going from small to large, and take a look at the hierarchy that is our brain. So let's start with some terminology. This is not in your vocabulary, but if you are taking some of the medical sciences, you might be familiar with this, but it is also just good to have gone over, because if you ever see this on a question, it's not against the possibility that you may see this, but understanding how medical sciences will use direction, right? Um, in these terms, you've got your dorsal, your ventral, anterior, posterior, and then medial, lateral. So, and you can see and read the breakdown of them, but dorsal is above or at the top. Ventral is below. Okay, so that'd be at the bottom. Then you've got your anteriors to the front, posteriors to the back, medial is in the middle, and the lateral is on the side. Okay, so if you're talking about a ventral lateral part of your brain, it's going to be on the bottom side of your brain, or ventral medial, bottom middle. Dorsal anterior is going to be in the top, front, etc. Okay, so being aware of that is useful. It's not necessarily a go-to psychology term. It's more of a medical sciences term, but they're good stuff to be aware of. Okay, so let's start talking about our brain and kind of how we're going to go about creating an understanding of our brain. So first off, it's organized in hemispheres. So if you take the brain as a whole, the first way that we can look at it is by a hemisphere or a side of the brain. Okay. We'll talk here in a moment about left brain versus right brain, which we hit a while back, knowing that that isn't a thing, that we use both sides of our brain, all aspects of our brain all the time. We have neurons firing across our brain all the time, and we need to. Then we can organize within our hemispheres, right? So they're going to kind of mirror each other, but we'll talk about how localization in each hemisphere can kind of change a little bit. And then the organization within those specific lobes, right? Where we've got specific language areas, auditory areas, visual areas, and so on. Okay. So here we are with our hemispheres. We got our right and left hemisphere. Each hemisphere does control certain things, right? We know from, and we'll talk about these types of things probably next week, but fMRI scans and other types of imaging about our brain and what lights up when different activities are going on, that certain things are primarily dominated on those sides of the brain. But that does not mean that, oh, you're left brain, right brain, right? Just because it's localized over there doesn't mean that that's the only place that it is taking place, right? So some things that are primary on the left side of your brain is a lot of your sensory stimulus getting from your right side of the body, and then vice versa. So how our brain works is it's almost opposite. So the things that we're doing on our right side usually controlled by our left side, and vice versa. Anything we're doing or feeling on the left side is usually controlled by our right side. Okay, so you can see that also with your motor control. So if you're right-handed, your left side of your brain is going to be the primary driver of your coordination, because you can throw, right, all that kind of stuff, kick, primarily with that hand. If you're left-handed, it's the exact opposite. Some localized stuff on the left side: speech, language, and comprehension, and we'll get to that later when we talk about Broca and Wernicke's area here soon. Analysis, calculation, so very concrete knowledge, time, sequencing, organization, recognizing of words, letters, numbers. Okay, so that's why many people say the left, if you're left brain, that you're more analytic, you're more organized, you're more structured, because that is where most of that information will primarily be localized. But it does not mean that nothing is happening on your right side. You need both sides to be able to do these things. And then your right side, you've got a lot of creativity, spatial ability, context perception, recognition of faces, places, objects. Okay, so a lot of these go hand in hand; they play together. You need both sides. But when we're looking at the imaging, you can usually see where your clusters of neurons are created on either side. Okay, so again, we just mentioned it. You're both. Okay, but we do have localization on either side. So then we can get into talking about lobes, right? The different lobes of our brain. So we can cut it into what you'll see here is really 4 major lobes, and we'll call the bottom 2, right? The bottom 2, the cerebellum and brainstem. We'll call that your old brain for right now. Okay, and we'll get to that in a second. So we'll start here in the top left with the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is our primary analysis part of the brain. Okay, that's your problem-solving, emotional traits, reasoning, speaking, motor activity. So this is where we make a lot of our big critical thinking decisions. And as we get older, this is the part that is most developing in your lives right now. Okay, think back, if you will, I know it's hard, to when you were in middle school and some of the challenges you may have had in making decisions, especially in social situations, and think now to the much more calm place that your brain is in when you have to analyze those types of situations. A lot of that is due to the maturation and the development of your frontal lobe. The parietal lobe is kind of there in the middle, not all the way back, not all the way front, in the yellow. Knowing right from left, so it is going to really help with your spatial awareness. Okay. Body orientation, reading, sensation. So this is where most of your motor function will come in. This is where some of, and we'll get to that, some of your language comes in, and a lot of your sensation, touch, all that kind of stuff would be right there. Occipital lobe in the very back, vision and color perception, very kind of niche in this lobe, but you'll take your visual sensation, visual images from your eyes, and then they'll run and actually cross through your corpus callosum to the back of your brain. Temporal lobe located on either side of your head, right about where your temples are, around your ears. And there's a lot of, obviously, auditory aspects to it. Same thing, it'll cross over, so what you hear in your right side actually stored in your left part of the brain, blah, blah, blah. But also big in language, okay? We'll get there. And then down to the old brain, your brainstem is going to help with a lot of your automatic nervous system stuff, okay? And you can see it there, breathing, body temp, digestion, swallowing, things that you don't really think about, that you just do. And then your cerebellum, okay, is going to be really important when it comes to your balance and your motor control, okay? So you're able to really be able to write with a pencil and draw and throw and pick up, small nails and all that other kind of stuff because of that, right? If you're a good athlete, you will have a very well-developed cerebellum, as well as some of your other motor cortexes will be a little bit more dense, but it's hugely important. Okay, so now we're breaking down your cortexes. And you see the frontal area, but you see right down the middle, kind of the parietal and frontal lobe, you see the motor cortex and the sotomasensory cortex. So those are your really densely populated areas with nerves that are related to your motor function, your ability to run, throw, kick, all that kind of stuff, and your recognition of senses and being able to make sense of them. Some people are far more acute in being able to understand and make sense of their senses. But here you can see kind of how things are broken down. You get smell right there at the top of the temporal lobe as well, and that is closely related to taste, which is also right behind the sotomasensory cortex, but in the parietal lobe. Okay, so you see kind of how these things are growing on one another. Okay, and then we'll talk about Broca's area and Wernicke's area. Okay, so these two areas, and you're going to be asked to kind of outline these in your packet, deal with the understanding of language and the creation of language. So being able to understand what people are saying and being able to make sense of your own sentences as you're putting them together. Both are located on the left side of the brain, primarily both in the temporal lobe, but a little bit stretching into the frontal lobe, a little bit stretching into the parietal lobe. But again, I'll let you kind of dig into that a little bit more without giving away all the secrets to them in your packets. So here's what we're looking at, the brain. So we have what could also be called as a convoluted brain, meaning it's folded on each other. So our brain is actually bigger than the space allows, and as human development has taken place, it has been squeezed into our skull, and it like folds itself, so you can get more brain in a smaller place. Okay, so you can see the evolutionary development. You've got a simple brain for a rat and a cat, and then you got a chimpanzee or other primates that have also a somewhat convoluted brain than ours. And we talked before about how, per our size, we have the most dense and large brain compared to all of the animals. So the areas of these folds, if you will, or are your raised side that you'd be able to see from the outside that look kind of like hills or mountains, those are your gyrus. So with those, that's what you would see. And then the indentions, the kind of valleys or gaps, if you will, are the sulci. So gyri and sulci. And that is kind of how the brain is folded in itself, and the regions in that brain to be able to make sense of it and where all that material would be stored. So now if we're looking at the old brain, we've got different aspects of the old brain, okay? So one is the pons, right? And that's kind of like an information store. And you see it's kind of at the top heading up to where our thalamus and hypothalamus and all that kind of stuff, the amygdala and everything else. And the pituitary gland also would be housed, again, in the center of our brain. So it's an information center that allows us to kind of use it as a grand central station or a call center, if you will. Next, below that, you see the medulla oblongata. It deals with respiration, blood circulation. So when triggered by the amygdala, medulla oblongata also helps release more blood flow when necessary in, say, a fight or flight response. Okay, and restrict it maybe when you're sleeping, calm your heart rate down, and so on. Cerebellum, we talked about that in the back of the head, kind of like a baseball-sized lump, and that helps control movement. Spinal cord, we went over that, carrying the nerves down to the body, and then a reticular formation that helps you pay attention, right? And it kind of runs through the heart of, the top of the spinal cord, through the pons. It helps you understand what you should be paying attention to, okay? And then structures of this limbic system that's made up inside. And you saw this from the last slide, right? That kind of ball and everything right there at the top that we didn't really mention. Well, now we're getting into that. So you can see, for just reference, where the frontal lobe is, okay? But then you have the basal ganglia, okay? These long, stringy message strands that kind of arc over the top of this whole system. Then you've got your olfactory bulbs, which help register and understand smell. You got your hypothalamus, your amygdala, hippocampus, and your thalamus. Okay, all of those we'll get to again, but they're kind of also old primitive aspects of your brain that help you deal with anything from food digestion regulation to fight and flight responses to basic sensory understanding. So here's that cross section of those two cortexes we were talking about. Okay, you've got your motor cortex, two staring at the screen on your left, sensory, sotomosensory on the right. But you can see how the breakdown works going across these lateral subsections of what controls your tongue, your teeth, your mouth, your face, your hands, etc. And then the senses that are also connected to those, right? So your hands, not only do they have muscles that are moving them, but you have sensation, you have the touch of them. Okay, so they're very closely related. You see they actually really kind of mirror one another, and the only thing that changes is the depth of those. So then with those strips, you get this depiction of this grotesquely odd-shaped human called homunculus. Homunculus is a sensory motor representation of what the human body looks like. So it gives you an idea of, to scale, where the majority of your nerve endings lie. And you can see the grossly oversized hands, lips, tongue, large eyes, nose, ears, okay? All that stuff is because that is where more sensory neurons are clustered and located. Okay, so the bigger the part of the body, the more neurons are there. So the more sensitive they are, if you will. Okay, so you can see some of the least sensitive places are back, arms, okay, all that kind of stuff. Here we're taking a look at a brain that has been kind of cut in half front to back. And what you're looking at is the corpus callosum, okay? So you see the outside's very pink and the inside's very gray, and you get, what we call the white or gray matter and the pink matter, okay? So the gray matter is really nothing more than like axons, okay? That's really what this is you've got all the nerves around the outside, and then you have all those axon tails running through and across, communicating with both sides. And the corpus callosum is like a great bridge, allowing them to get across to be able to keep those connections alive. There's a lot of issues that go with an injury to your corpus callosum, whether you have to have it severed or if there's other damage to it, because it restricts the communication between the two sides of your brain. So here's what we talk about with that asymmetry. So function lateralized on the left, language, word recognition, verbal abilities, computation, logical reasoning, okay? And then facial recognition, emotional processing, visual spatial awareness, intuition, visual arts are on the right, okay? So you kind of get a sense for what's going on in your brain on either side. You've got those messaging systems like your basal ganglia, thalamus, hypothalamus stuff running down the middle as well. And these gentlemen were instrumental in creating research bases for taking a look at this cerebral asymmetry. And here's kind of a cool way of looking at it. We'll use visual pathways to kind of explain this. So you've got the optic chiasm, which is not the corpus callosum, right? They're different, but this is an optical region where your information is going to cross over, okay, to the different sides. So you've got your visual field versus the cerebral hemisphere. So if you follow kind of what each eye is picking up, you can see that the primary store of information goes to the opposite side. Okay, so what you're seeing on the right side, what will be your right eye, is being stored on the left. And vice versa, what's seeing on the left is stored on your right. So understanding how this works, if you had an injury, say, where you had to have an operation to separate your hemispheres of the brain, that can lead into a lot of issues. Okay. So here's an interesting lab study done on patients that had what we would call split brain operations. Okay, so what they would be doing is they would be asked to identify, you can see on the table up at the top, identify objects that they're seeing with either hand. Okay, so those that saw what they were looking at here, so say you've got a pencil and a spoon, if they had it severed, each hand would pick up something different, okay? So in here, you've got your left visual field and you've got your right visual field. So they wouldn't be able to make sense of what they had. Because you have two different pictures, you would be kind of confused, okay? You wouldn't be able to recognize what you're looking at because both sides are taking up with something different, so it'd be hard to recognize. And on the left side, you only have your spoon, so you're able to focus both eyes on it and getting that information to it, okay? So continuing on, you've got he on one side, heart on the other. that side seeing, that side is seeing art. We'll back that up. Okay, see, you're getting your word stores. If you ask somebody to tell you what it is, okay, they'll be able to tell you on the left side. They'll be able to show you on the right side. So here you've got your gentleman grabbing the spoon, but look, his language center, which is on his left side, is where the pencil is. So they're going to tell you pencil and pick up a spoon. Here they're going to see he and say, or they're going to be able to touch he but say art. Okay. Indifference. Here we go. We're going to take a look. They're going to be able to tell you chicken and point to snow shovel. But you can see the different arms that are pointing at different things. Here we are again with our sotomasensory aspects, sensory motor stuff. Homunculus one more time. I know we went over this. There we go. And you'll be drawing this. I think there's also a crash course video in there kind of representing it. Cool video that helps explain the split brain stuff of what they are able to see and not see. So there we go. This is going to be broken up, I think, over a couple days. So feel free, you can watch the whole thing at once, or you can split it and kind of follow along by day. Okay? All right, that's